my very first race in a real-life race car. So in March of 2015, less than 6 months after my indoor electric karting debut, I was being strapped into a non-synchronized manual gearbox open-wheel race car. I mean, what could go wrong, right? So in today's video, I want to go through all the good, bad, and ugly from my first ever car race that took place just a couple days after my 15th birthday. But before we do that, let's go ahead and look at a couple of quick examples so you have an understanding of what those driving skills look like today. I think this will help truly tell the story of just how difficult it is to succeed in this sport. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at 3 key moments from a race I had in Spa in 2020. I had a problem in quali, so I started off the race in dead last. So we're looking at these overtakes in particular because I want you to have a good baseline of what F3 commitment level, driving technique, and situational awareness looks like. And then later in the video, we'll contrast that with my first ever race. So first up, let's take a look at our race start. So not the best off the line, but I'm already starting to see some congestion forming to that inside line, so I'm going to try and go around the outside to try and see if I can force an overtake or two. Okay, so now heading into a rouge. I know 3 wide isn't going to work there, so I'm going to actually lift off here and actually give these 2 cars a little bit of space to fight, and then I'm going to try and maximize the momentum up the hill to try and get at least one overtake here. Okay, so 1 car's out of the way. Now I need to try and pull back into the slipstream of the car ahead. I'm quite far back, so if I want to overtake here, I'm going to have to commit really hard and very, very late. And hopefully he's taken by surprise.
Nice.
Okay, so now moving on to the second moment I want you guys to see. Now, I see 2 cars battling ahead here, and I know they're going to be fighting and maybe a little bit distracted. So what I want to do here is just slow down a little bit, try and make sure I have the maximum momentum out of the final corner here, this right-hander, and then maybe an overtake is possible. So it looks like I've caught him off guard and he doesn't have time to defend. So now I just need to try and keep the minimum speed up on entry by blipping the throttle, and we're clear. And now for the third and final overtake. This one's purely about commitment and send, and again, you have to go extremely late to the point where they don't think you're actually going to do it, and then they have no choice but to basically relinquish the position. Now try and remember what that commitment and confidence level looks like, because now we're going to go look at my first ever car race, and I can promise you aren't going to see anything like that. At least not from me. So you now join me at Palm Beach International Raceway. This is the very first track I ever raced at, so it will always hold a very special place in my heart. So the car you're seeing me sit in is a Bertil Roos F2000. So essentially, it's an open-wheel car using a 95 horsepower Ford Pinto engine. It's running on completely bone-stock street tires, and it's using a 4-speed, non-synchronized manual transmission, and we'll get into what that means in a little bit. But in short, it requires an advanced driving technique called double clutching in order to operate it smoothly. Now, this car does anything but set the world on fire, but it is more than enough to learn all the basics of driving fast. And it was certainly enough to scare the shit out of me and my dad, who also did this 5-day racing school with me. Successful completion of this course allowed me to apply for a national racing license with the SCCA. So the race you're about to see is the first of 2 races that happened on the 5th and final day of the racing school. On the previous day, I actually had qualified on pole position in our first timed session of the week. So it would be a complete understatement to say how surprised I was, given I had literally no experience before this. Actually, the only car experience I had before this was actually the previous week, when a friend from indoor karting lent me his manual Hyundai Genesis so I could at least learn how to pull a car off the line in a parking lot. So it's safe to say I'm really as green as it gets for this race. Honestly, I was actually really disappointed when I had qualified on pole, because now I had this immense weight on my shoulders that I had to succeed now. I cannot describe to you the amount of nerves I'm going through sitting in this car before this race. Now, it's one thing to drive quickly on your own, but it's a completely other thing to actually trust the people around you, especially when you know they're all also rookies. I mean, that's how nervous I am. I'm literally just stalling in the pits. And I'm also so nervous here that I'm actually going to wave P2 by so that he's ahead of me for the warm-up lap. It's like, what am I thinking? Now coming around the last couple of corners for the race start, My nerves are at the absolute maximum. I've never experienced adrenaline like this before, so when you're not used to it, it's a really difficult thing to get adjusted to. But the goal is to be as clean as possible and to survive turn 1. Okay, so I've covered off turn 1 on the inside, and then a car from seemingly nowhere comes across the grass and takes the lead. Now he's going to give it back because he knows he's made a mistake there, but that guy wasn't even P2. He must have been P4 at least. Alright, so I've managed to survive the first couple of corners, so now I just need to get my head down and to absolutely push as hard as I can to try and make a gap to P2. There's a very long straight here at Palm Beach International Raceway, so I have to be miles ahead for there not to be a slipstream effect. You can see I'm a little bit under the limit to this section because I see a marshal running out onto the track. He's about to give a black flag, probably to the guy who completely blew the brakes into turn 1. Okay, heading down the back straight here, you're going to see a very interesting line I had into the final section. I was going for this diagonal line to shorten the distance to the apex and to do basically a V'd off approach into this last corner. Now the problem with that is, even though the car is straight as it's pointing to the apex, because I'm still turning, there's still going to be a little bit of lateral G-force as I'm braking, which is actually making it harder for me to downshift properly or to have stability on the brakes. Okay, now heading into turn 4 on the second lap here, you're just going to hear on the throttle how bad my technique is. You hear I'm on the throttle, on the throttle, on the throttle. It's not just one consistent swell swoop onto the power, and you can see how much track I'm not utilizing on the exit. If only I could just go back in time and slap myself in the face. Okay, so you can see through this section here, I'm pushing very hard on the second lap to try and build that gap to P2. You can't see him, but he still is fairly close on my gearbox. But still, you can see how much room I'm leaving on the exits here. I was just deathly afraid of that wall. Now you can see here in turn 10, I'm really trying to work on pushing those entries as hard as possible. End up missing the apex a little bit there, but I'm keeping that minimum speed up, which is very important for lap time in a long distance corner. And you can see just how hard I'm pushing because I completely missed a shift there, and now I'm trying to do some weird cutback. I mean, I've managed to get a little bit of momentum back, but honestly, I don't know what I'm thinking. Now, I'm focusing very hard on every shift now because after that one bad downshift, I'm having to concentrate really, really hard to make sure I don't do it again. So, as I mentioned before, these gearboxes are non-synchronous, which means the driver needs to manually synchronize the engine with the gearbox. Now, that can be done in one of two ways. The first way is a method called double clutching. So essentially what that looks like is when you hit the brake, you also push down the clutch, you pull the gear into neutral, you lift off the clutch, you rev, then you put the clutch back in and then back into the gear you want to go down to. So it's a very complicated process, but all that needs to happen within milliseconds. So as someone who didn't even know how to drive a regular manual, this was a very complicated, very cognitively stressful process. Now there is a much easier method called float shifting. So because it's non-synchronous, you're actually able to shift these gears without using the clutch at all. You just need to lift properly in between shifts and the gear should go straight through. Now it will increase wear for the gearbox, but it's very common for race cars to have this if they are manual. But the school told us that wasn't a possibility because obviously they wanted to save the gearboxes. So if I had known that, I would have done it, but at this time, I only knew double clutching as an option. So I want you to imagine I'm thinking about that entire process step by step every time I'm downshifting, which might put into context just how difficult this is for me at this moment. And here's a perfect example of just how much concentration it's taking me because it's very easy to make a mistake. And just like that, the other car goes wide and I tunnel vision and follow him straight away from the apex. Now I had a great momentum here, and if I had just committed to the throttle, I would have definitely overtaken him quite easily. But for some reason, I just didn't have the confidence to get alongside him. And again, I don't know what I'm doing here. I mean, I'm clearly trying to pull out to fill up his mirrors, and I guess it worked because he missed his apex, but like, I needed to be much closer to realistically do a move there, and yeah, you can see the rookie techniques. And again here, I'm going to pull to the left to attempt an overtake, and I'm just doing it way too early, but for some reason he decides to give it up, and I got really lucky there, but I genuinely did not deserve that. Now, this driver I'm fighting with in P2, his name is Ben. I believe he was about mid-30s, European truck driver, who actually was a truck driver for Bertil Roos, and he was absolutely rapid. I mean, you could tell how much natural ability he had. He had never done any racing like me, but at that age to be that fast so naturally is really, really impressive. But the one advantage he did have was he knew how to double clutch from the truck driving, so you gotta give him that. And now heading onto the back straight, I'm gonna get slipstream, and I'm gonna lose the lead heading into turn 10. You can see how much more speed he has going down the straight. He doesn't pull back over, he's actually going to keep that middle line, and because he keeps this middle line, it's actually going to prevent me from taking my typical diagonal line. But you can see actually, I have an opening, and for some reason again, I just don't have the commitment to get alongside him and to hold that momentum through the corner. Okay, you can see heading out of turn 2 here, I'm really getting a good exit out of here, but for some reason again, I'm going to pull out extremely early. And for some reason also, he's going to just give me the position, just not wanting to pull back over to defend. I guess the rule technically that we're following here is American rules for defense, which is you cannot defend in reaction to the driver behind. You actually have to be proactive. So if I pull out early, technically he can't move over. In European racing, you can do proactive defenses, which makes for, I think, much more exciting and much more aggressive defense. Now we're heading into turn 6, and I'm going to have a very close call with a downshift here. And you can see immediately how much cognitive load that's taking. I'm thinking about what just happened and how close that was, and I have my very first tank slapper. Now it doesn't look like much, but to me in that car, with how high the center of gravity is in this car, it felt like there was no way I was going to save that, and like I was an absolute drift god when I saved it. Now I don't know if there was a rule in this particular class which prevented us from defending on this main straight, but you can see just on the right there as he peeks by, I'm getting slipstream again, and I end up losing the lead once more. And again, I still don't know why I'm not using all this road on the left, and I'm trying to set up for this final kink. Again, we're going to see another phenomenon here where I'm stuck in tunnel vision. I can see the car ahead is missed the apex a little bit, and so in return I also missed the apex. And now I have a very good opportunity, a lot of momentum here, and I'm really focused on where he's going to go, and I money shift the engine. I mean, oh, what am I doing? Luckily these Ford Pinto engines are bulletproof, so we're all good on that front. Now you may have also noticed in that move that he stayed all the way to the left. So he's definitely caught on to my turn 4 lunges. So it's now going to be much harder to overtake here. Now heading into turn 6 here, you might just be able to make out a car in the distance that's clearly had some sort of incident, and they've left a bit of debris on the track that I'm now going to hit. Now as soon as I've hit it, I've been a little bit distracted because I'm not sure if there's damage. I'm going to miss the apex here, and now on my head, all I can think about is, do I have damage? What did I just hit? And as a result, the cognitive load is very high, and I have another misshift. This is going to completely allow the car ahead to leave me. Now this is going to give so much room to the car ahead. Now fast forwarding a couple of laps, I've done a really good job to try and catch back up to the car ahead. I put in some very consistent lap times, but you're going to see just how bad my track usage is relative to this car ahead. You can see he's just on the power, matted, and he's going all the way up to the grass, up to that wall. He's clearly not as afraid as I am. Heading into turn 10, I'm going to go for a good send on the brakes using my diagonal line, but I've done a big double downshift going from 4th to 2nd, and if you listen very closely, I think I had a little bit of throttle on the brakes. Let's just have a listen. And I think as soon as I realized I was on the throttle, I lifted off, and that's when you see that entry oversteer correction there. Finally, it looks like I'm actually putting some good lines together in turn 1 and 2, and I'm even using the exit curve in turn 2. I think I actually surprised myself with how good that line was, and I was actually thinking about it as I'm heading into turn 4. And of course, as a result, I've thrown away all the work I've just done by completely missing a shift and a brake zoom. I have a good slipstream here heading into turn 10, but the car ahead is well aware, and he actually moves to my diagonal line to cover off the inside. Now, he doesn't do it quite properly, and so he actually leaves a bit of an opening, but for some reason I release the brakes too much, giving that entry oversteer, and it completely ruins my chances of sticking my nose in the last corner. And with that, my first ever race, I finished P2. Now, that was a great race. Mad respect to Ven, who won that race. Now this race was actually the qualifying heat, so the result of this actually determined the starting grid for the final race, and I ended up winning that race. So to this day, Ben and I are still 1-1.
Ran a real clean race, ran some very aggressive lines out there, was doing the diagonal into turn one perfectly, the rest of the zero okay, and really put it together. When I had 14-year-olds, and I told his father this, when I had 14-year-olds, I keep a real sharp eye. I don't care what they do back at the hotel, I don't care what they do at lunch, but they got to act like 22-year-olds on the racetrack. I think everybody will agree, both kids operated very maturely on the track. And this kid happened to pull it together, ran relatively mistake-free race in one race. Come on up, Cap.